فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Yunus Mirza and welcome to the Islamic Mary podcast. So for today, I want to speak about the passing of John Esposito. And John Esposito was one of my teachers, mentors, and friends at Georgetown University. I remember taking his sophomore seminar, Islam in the West, at Georgetown University the semester after 9/11. And for those of you who were young and may not remember 9/11, it was a scary time. I remember I had just transferred to Georgetown and I was only on campus for a couple of weeks when the attacks occurred. I remember going into my Arabic class and a fellow student coming in and saying, "Do you all know what happened?" And we all said, What happened?" And she said, "We've been attacked." Class was immediately canceled. I remember going to our colleagues' dorm room, and there we saw the Twin Towers on fire. Part of me hoped that it was just an accident and that things would go back to normal. But as I got in my car and tried to drive home, I realized that my life had changed forever. It took several hours to get out of Washington, D.C., which was the site of the second attack on the Pentagon, and all the cell phone towers were jammed. For those of us who used Nokia cell phones at the time, we were unable to get in touch with loved ones and friends, and there was a sense of panic and fear of what was going on. Later that week, I went back to campus, and I had the sense that people were looking at me differently and that they were more conscious of the spelling and pronunciation of my name. When I took the class with John Esposito, it was my second semester at Georgetown. So it was the spring semester, and it had been several months after 9/11. The war in Afghanistan had already began, and there was discussion about who are we war against. Are we against Islam? Are we trying to fight terror? Are we trying to just fight Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda? And when I took the class with him, Islam in the West, it was one of my theology requirements. So at Georgetown, there's a requirement to take 2 theology courses. One of them usually is the problem of God, or how do we understand God in the modern world. And the second class was a class of your choice. You could pick whatever religious tradition you liked, and I picked Islam. And this kind of speaks to the larger Jesuit as well as Catholic university identity of making sure that their students understand their place in the world and that they educate the whole person, the spirit included. And when I took the class with John Esposito, he had just released his new book, Unholy War, Terror in the Name of Islam. And he was frequently being interviewed by various news outlets and media personalities. I remember we were sitting in class and class would end, and then his secretary would rush in and say, "Oh, you have a new interview request from CNN or ABC," and he would run to get it. It felt like a privilege to be in his class, and it actually encouraged me to get a certificate in Christian-Muslim relations through the School of Foreign Service. I kept up with John Esposito throughout the years. He would later write me a letter recommendation to graduate school, and I eventually did a master's in Arab studies and then went on to do Arabic and Islamic studies at Georgetown as well. When I was in the midst of my dissertation and I needed support, a dissertation writing scholarship, he came forward and said his center would help, and he would even write letters for me as I was applying for jobs. So he's someone there's professors who you take a class with one time and you never hear from them again, or you never maybe reach out. But he was always someone that was very personable, approachable, someone I could go to when I needed help. And one of my early employers mentioned to me that they had read many of John's books. He had written over 50 books, many of them co-authored, and he was impressed with my connection with him. And I'm pretty sure that letter recommendation helped me get that first interview, which landed my first job. When I was at Allegheny College in Pennsylvania, I would invite him to our university, and I was in touch with him on and off regarding book projects, job opportunities, and general advice. So I got the opportunity to welcome him to my campus. People were impressed that I knew him personally. He was somewhat of an academic celebrity, and he gave this really nice talk about Islam in the West. in many ways, he spoke out against this idea of the clash of civilizations, that we here in the United States and the West, we need to fight against Islam. It was the West versus the rest, and that Islam had bloody borders, and that there was this inevitable clash between Western and Islamic values. Rather, he was someone that was the opposite of the Muslim ban, in the sense that he would actually travel to Muslim majority countries. He had genuine friendships with Muslims, and he wrote about them as they were human beings with emotions, feelings, and issues and challenges. When I told him I was writing my book on the Islamic Mary, he encouraged me to complete the project and eventually wrote a blurb for it, which published on the book. And the editors were really keen to have him as one of the endorsers. He's well known in the field, and having him endorse the book was really important and essential in trying to get a larger audience. And he was someone that believed in shared figures like Abraham, Mary, and he believed in this idea of Christian-Muslim relations, and that Christian and Muslims had many things in common, and one of them was Mary. And I was in touch with him not too long ago when he actually came to visit my mom, my wife, and myself after my dad passed away. So this, I think, speaks once again to the human connection. He actually emailed me saying, "Oh, I heard that your dad passed away," and he was deeply saddened. He was someone that visited when it came times to grief and losing loved ones. And he spoke really highly of how my father supported him and followed through on his various commitments and promises. So he was one of these academics that was remarkable in fundraising, that he wasn't one that just simply wrote books and taught, but he was out meeting people, trying to fundraise for his center, for the Bridge Initiative, which deals with Islamophobia. And he met a lot of business people and donors, and he really felt that my dad was true to his word. Many people commit and promise a lot, but they don't deliver. And my dad would always say, you need to under-promise, but then over-deliver. So that's something that John Esposito felt was the case. And he would tell me, your dad was the best. And I really appreciate that. He was someone that he understood the human condition, right? He understood that we weren't simply minds and intellects, but we had hearts and souls, and we had sadnesses. And he understood that I was grieving at the time, and he wanted to come visit us at our house. And I was always impressed with his warm, open, and nurturing personality, and his ability to listen and mentor young academics and students. And those of us who had the opportunity to go to college, you have this stereotypical professor, which is aloof, who gives lectures, which is famous, but they're out, they're on the stage, and you're out in the audience, you're in an auditorium, and you feel like that the professor is not approachable, right? There's someone who writes books, and they write articles, and they lecture, but it's not someone you actually go up to and speak on a human level and discuss what's on your mind. Despite being a famous intellectual, he would still make time to meet, whether in person or on the phone, and share his thoughts and advice. And that was something really fascinating, because I've taken classes with so many different professors, but he was someone I felt I could go to for advice, whether it's jobs, whether it's career. And he was someone that I felt that would be able to understand my situation and let me know what he thought. And there were many times I would just call him on the phone, and he would say, "Oh yeah, I would encourage you to accept that board nomination or publish with this press." He had this really strong relationship with Oxford University Press, and he actually nominated me to be an editor there. So he was always thinking about ways to help people and those around him. So when I reflect on the life of John Esposito, so many things stand out to me, but there are maybe three that I want to highlight. And the first one was that he was very courageous, and he had the ability to take strong stands against Islamophobia and other injustices. So he was someone that didn't just write books and lecture about Islam, but he would actually sign petitions when people were in prison wrongly, when there were revolutions, attempts to boycott individuals or organizations. He would stick his neck out, and he would stand up and say something, or write letters. I remember when he was the president of the American Academy of Religion, there was a labor dispute in one of the hotels that we were going to stay at, and he spoke out against that, and he encouraged the hotel and the corporation to treat their employees better. And he would use his name, privilege, and position not simply to enrich himself, but to help others in need, especially those who had been treated unjustly. And that was something that really struck me, was some academics are simply out there to become more famous or to get that new book contract or get the honorarium for speaking engagement, get that new chair. But he was someone that really cared about people. And he definitely, there's no doubt that academia helped him and supported him, and he became rich. He would joke that, the Iranian Revolution helped him get his first Lexus, right? That because of these world events, people would invite him, and it led to him becoming well off. And before that, people weren't really interested in religion or Islam. But even though he was able to live an honorable life, he still was thinking about others. And then what also inspired me with his ability to collaborate with so many different authors and contributors. So many of his books are co-authored, and he has served on various editorial boards and worked with personalities from all over the world. So if you actually look closely at his books, many of them have a second or even third author. And he lent his name, so that was something that helped a lot of younger scholars, that they were trying to find a name for themselves, and he would say, hey, I can co-author a book with you. So he had the ability to work with so many different types of people, and he was on so many different editorial boards. And he was truly a global scholar, constantly traveling to conferences and programs and speaking in different media outlets. So I would always see him in different places throughout the world, and whether that would be on social media or actually in person. And when I visited Malaysia the other year, I heard that he was recently there and had participated in various programs and initiatives. So he was someone, especially in the last couple of years of his life, receiving so many different Lifetime Achievement Awards, whether that was the Fearless Ally Award with the Al-Hibri Foundation, whether it was the Lifetime Achievement Award with the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy, whether that was a honorary doctorate from the International Islamic University in Malaysia. He was someone that was constantly traveling, speaking, receiving these recognitions of someone that contributed to the understanding of Islam and forming genuine relationships with Muslims. And finally, I was always fascinated with how he was in touch with his emotions and concepts of loss and grief. He would openly cry at venues when it was mentioned that someone passed away, and when he remembered challenging moments in his life. And I remember there was one iftar dinner that the Center for Christian Muslim Understanding had sponsored, and we had eaten food, and he gave a small speech to everyone, and in the middle of the speech he started to cry because he remembered the loss of one of his parents. And he wasn't able to continue the speech, and his colleague John Vole just jumped in and started to complete his thoughts. I thought that was so memorable because when you speak, you're supposed to be composed and have all of your thoughts and emotions together, but he felt it was okay to cry in front of the audience. And then his colleague almost was expecting John to break down, and he just kind of jumped in and also contributed to the importance of Ramadan and forming relationships. So John was a true friend to so many of us throughout the world. He helped bridge Islam in the West and was a pioneer in Christian Muslim dialogue. The Center, CMCU, or the Center for Christian Muslim Understanding, was unique when it started in the early 1990s. It started after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the Red Scare was turning into the Green Scare, the fear of Islam. And this center and his work in many ways spoke out against the idea of banning Muslims or seeing them simply as terrorists, but actually forming true relationships. His friendship was not only about niceties, but really getting to know people, understanding their issues and challenges, and helping where he could. And what I mean by that is he was someone that was not simply doing his academic job in terms of writing and publishing and saying, it was nice to meet you. But he really wanted to know people. He was really curious about humans and human relationships. And when he understood there was a challenge, he understood that he couldn't always help. There were certain challenges. Like, I remember one time I went to him and talking about the job market. And he was honest that, look, he didn't have any jobs, but he could write me a letter of recommendation and he could help me get other jobs within the market. And I really appreciate him helping me get my first job. And he would help where he could, right? So this idea of even visiting me when my father passed away and understanding that the emotions behind that, right, of losing a parent and the idea of grief. And when I reflect back on our relationship, I see that he was always there to provide help and support, whether it was a letter of recommendation, an endorsement, or words of encouragement. He demonstrated so many values that I hope to embody, such as scholarship, friendship, and mentorship. And when I look at John Esposito, he wasn't that scholar that published profusely in academic journals or was looking always to publish with a university press, but he was someone that had this understanding of the public understanding of religion. He wanted people on the street to understand what Islam was, to explain that Christians and Muslims could live together, that there wasn't this irreconcilable barrier between Islam and the West. And he was someone that was trying to make sure that the average person understood what his scholarship was all about. And he went beyond that in many ways, of forming so many friendships with people and mentorship relationships. And this is something when I'm very conscious of now as a professor and a director of my own institute and center, is that it's important that we simply not just focus on the downloads or the views, but we actually go out into the world and develop these true human relationships and try to understand people where they are and see how we can help them in whatever way possible. So thank you for listening to the Islamic Married podcast. I would encourage you to order my book, The Islamic Married. I'm really fortunate to have some interest there on Goodreads. There's been a new discussion on Goodreads regarding the book. Also, just interviewed by a Greek paper regarding the Islamic Mary. The journalist is Greek, and he mentioned that Mary is venerated in Greece, and he encouraged me to come and visit, which I hope to do in the future. I would encourage you to subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We see that there is increased listenership on all the different platforms, and encourage your friends, students, and colleagues to listen to the podcast. So some people have told me that they've been listening to the podcast in study circles or book clubs. Also, the fall semester is coming up, and it's a good opportunity to have the students listen to something and not only read articles or watch documentaries. We're now at over 100 episodes of the Islamic Married podcast. So it's a library there of interviews, monologues, chronic commentary. You can go through that library and see what you find interesting. You can review this podcast, which helps people find the podcast and encourages them to listen to it. And you can visit my website and join my newsletter, where you'll be updated on this podcast as well as the Islamic Married book tour. Thanks very much, and take care.